we have Kirsty, and it would just be great to hear sort of what you do. Kirsty and I met Kirsty through her sister Rosie, who's my age, who I went to school with. And I've just been sort of aware that over the last year, you've been getting into the mental health space and setting up something of your own. So yeah, it would be really good to hear how you introduce yourself.
Of course. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited and I love all the stuff that you guys do together already. So thank you for thinking of me for this series. I'm Kirsty. I'm 26 and I am the founder and host of a podcast and platform, Cogno, which basically is dedicated to exploring a lot of different approaches to mental health and helping people navigate what's out there and what options there are. I've also just recently finished a master's in psychology and neuroscience for mental health. So really just setting a foundation to be able to help others with their own journey.
Wow. I mean, I was going to say, how did you get into doing what you're doing? But did it come from that degree, or was it something like, was it chicken and egg? Did you do the degree and then want to get into it, or you wanted to set up something of your own and then decide to study it?
It's kind of interesting, actually. I was studying psychology undergrad at uni before all of this, and during that time, I really struggled with my own mental health. I was because of a series of events and also my response, I guess, to those events. I got into quite a bad place with my own mental health, and it was almost a bit of a paradox because I didn't know how to get myself out of it despite studying the mind and despite studying mental health. And I think that was something I really struggled with, feeling like I didn't have the resources or tools myself. So I was very motivated to set up essentially, I guess, a bit of a network or a bit of a resource that other people could use as well to hear. It's not just about therapy or traditional approaches to mental health. We speak a lot about breath work or movement, as we'll talk about, and other ways of supporting your mental health. And so I guess it was a bit of both. It was academic as well as my own experience.
And is there a reason for the name? I wanted to ask you that before, but I didn't want to ask it over like a message.
I get asked this quite a lot. It's literally, so cogno, like to hear, is like cognitive, I guess, or cognition, but it's spelled Koggno, and the K is literally from Kirsty, which I always think is a little bit Kardashian of me just to slap a K on the front of it. But that's how the word came out. I've actually had the word for ages. Cogno's only like a year old, but I knew that I wanted to do something in this space, and that name has been with me for a long time.
Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel any better, on my mental health platform is called Rosie Viva. I can't believe that stuck. I really can't. But it's good.
It's so cool though when something like that becomes a word, like in your vocabulary as well. Like Viva Fever, even in my head, is like something that I know and think of as like a word. It's not just like your name or platform.
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of people say it out loud. They're sort of just like, "Oh, I'm coming to your event." I'm like, "Go on, say it."
Yeah, tell me where you're going. Viva Fever.
But no, that's so cool, and like, thanks for explaining how you got into it. And it's obviously always nice for people to hear who follow your platform how you got into it from a place of like being maybe where they are when they reach out. So I just wondered, because I've seen that you've done a podcast as part of this sort of project, there's been a lot of people who you've interviewed, and what's been the sort of most inspiring thing that someone said to you, or has there been a moment in one of those interviews where they've said something and then you've really taken that into your own life and used it sort of practically?
I think it's really interesting because part of Cogno as well is having all of these very different voices on the podcast. So a lot of the advice is coming through very different lenses. But one thing that I think almost everyone has touched on one way or another is this idea of healing not being linear, and also just the power of being present. And I think that's two things that have really stuck with me throughout, I guess, my own journey alongside Cogno. And I think being able to forgive yourself when healing doesn't feel linear. There was an episode I did with Rob Rea, who you know as well.
My friend.
Yeah, who does breath work, and I've done a few of his sessions as well. And one thing that I then interviewed him after doing some of his sessions. And one of the big things I learned from that is, you know, when you're on a healing journey and you're doing practices like that, you have to be very present to really listen to what you're going through. But then remembering that if it brings something up or you feel like you've set yourself back, that it's not that you're doing anything wrong or you're not failing by doing that. It's part of an ongoing process. And I think for me, that's been so important, and like advice that I hope I can now reiterate to other people.
Yeah. And I also think, because I've done a few of Rob's breathwork classes, like sometimes you go into it and you'll have a really big reaction, and it will be like such a sort of moment of realization in whatever you're trying to deal with. And then other times you go in and you just can't access that sort of state. And I've had other times where I've gone in and I've like got the giggles or something, which is just so different to this like sort of massive moment of realization you were supposed to have.
Totally.
And with like a family member and they're sort of snoring or something. So it's really interesting how like the more open-minded you are that this sort of healing process is going to be linear. It means that when things do really take you forward, you're so like aware of it. And it's just good to not put expectation on certain things like really helping, because then I think you go into it not relaxed and like just
definitely. I think also like a lot of I always say, you know, I've got a very loud kind of overthinking brain that looks backwards and forwards a lot. And so being able to have moments of really tapping into like feeling present and what's really going on and what needs to be addressed or what can actually be parked for a bit is something that I'm definitely learning as well. So it's amazing. I mean, one of the best things about Cogno is to interview all of these people and hear their advice and insight on what their approaches have meant to them.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, actually, of all the people who you've interviewed, is there any interviews which have surprised you?
There's definitely an element of each one that surprises me, because although we do a bit of a pre-meet, I try to leave like quite a lot for the podcast as well. So that's quite a difficult one to ask. My interview with Ben Curry, who is a professional, he plays rugby at a super high level for the country. And I think I found that fascinating, because just he gave quite a lot in that interview, and hearing someone of such a high standard of professional sport really open up about their mental health alongside their physical health. There was a lot of that it just made me really realize that everyone's going through something, and we've really got to protect like the mind body together.
Yeah. And I think it's also just good to sort of see someone who physically is maybe at the top of their game, and how even, you know, as much physical exercise as you can do, it sort of validates that you can also be going through a rough time when maybe you're exercising every day and there's no sort of one way to be happy. Like at some points in your life, exercise isn't going to be enough. You've got to seek therapy or speak to people, and that's not a failure. It's just
it's working through something. Yeah, I guess actually to that, the other big point that I've really held on to as well, and that I'd never really thought of necessarily, was with a therapist, actually, Louise Wiggin, and in her episode she very much speaks about, you know, the suitcase that we all bring into relationships or to an environment, and actually often we have to unpack that suitcase in order to understand where we're at mentally, or expect to understand how we react to certain situations and things like that. And for me, that's been a really helpful analogy. I feel like you might want to listen to the clip from the actual episode to hear how she talks about it.
Yeah.
But that's been an amazing piece as well.
Me with like a whole trolley full of suitcases.
I know. I just remember when we were doing the interview, and I'd actually quite recently had a breakup. It was last year, and I was literally just sat there thinking about like, oh, I'm hearing this as like, I need to go and unpack some suitcases before anything else.
My visualization is like when you're a kid and you have those trolleys which you put several suitcases on at the airport. I was like, no, it's fine. I'll definitely listen. But with Cogno, how has it sort of changed your day to day? Like, are you doing this around a full-time job? Is it something which you dip into every day, or is it sort of like you allocate it to your weekends and keep it as this sort of passion project?
It's actually very varied at the moment. During my master's, I was definitely able to give it a lot more time, because I was balancing them both, and they obviously intertwined quite naturally, that I felt like I was being able to write my big research projects and whatever alongside Cogno. At the moment, it's a mixture of work. I'm still doing a research project, Cogno. It's a little bit up in the air, which makes it slightly more uncertain. But I feel like whenever you might be able to relate to this as well, whenever you start something or you put yourself into something, it's really hard to not do it the whole time, or not always have it in the back of your mind. So it is a passion project. It's not a replacement for full-time work or anything at the moment, but it just depends on if I've got podcasts to edit. I've done a few live events and things like that, but it definitely takes up a lot of my time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's also just still setting aside a time to like completely switch off, which for me, I find quite difficult because I'll go to work and then my weekends become the sort of work I do in the mental health space. And it's sometimes just accepting that one evening you just need to watch really good TV or just like switch off your mind, because those activities, I guess, for us are different in that it stimulates your mind. It doesn't sort of unwind you. So it's just finding time amongst that passion to take a moment just to not do too much.
Definitely. It's so easy to start like overthinking and actually getting excited about the ideas you're having, but then, as you say, like not having those moments of like mental calmness.
Yeah, it's a balance. But no, it's amazing because you've had so many sort of conversations through this platform. And what is one sort of motivation you would give someone to start moving their body and getting into exercise? Like if you were to have someone come to you who's not really using that yet as a tool, how would you go about sort of encouraging them?
I think to start with, I think that something I've learned quite recently actually with movement is it just doesn't have to be a really long form of exercise as a form of movement to help your mental well-being. Movement could literally be going for your 5-minute walk in the morning. It could be putting your favorite song on and dancing around the room. But what it's going to do is it's just going to help remove cognitive blocks. You're going to release endorphins. It's just going to help your mind and body to also connect, because you've done something with purpose and something that you can feel like you've achieved. Something I say quite a lot at the moment is like celebrating progress, not perfection. And I think movement in that sense can provide you with a bit of routine as well. If you set yourself the goal and then you achieve it, that can be a really good thing. We actually hosted a movement and mental health panel I think last week as well, to have a running, yoga, Pilates and dance approach. And what was amazing about that is it just shows that whatever form of movement works for you is right. It doesn't have to be what you're seeing everyone else doing, but finding that is where I encourage, just take 5 minutes to try different things and see what works for you. And that might also change. Like sometimes running for me is the biggest release, and it really helps me remove those cognitive blocks and see what I need to be focusing on. But other times I just don't have the motivation, and actually putting a mat out and doing stretches or something a bit more slower paced would be what suits.
Yeah, I also feel like I go through such stages, like within my cycle or within like over a few months. Like when I trained for my first marathon this year, I really struggled with the start of the training because mentally I knew that I had months to go. And that was the shorter runs. And then towards the end, when like my Sunday run would be 2.5 hours, my relationship with running was so positive. I looked forward to it so much. It was the highlight of my week. And I'm like, it just goes to show that sort of your mental state is going to affect what type of exercise you can do. And that Christmas run where I had 3 months of training to go was so much more difficult than like a 35k just near the marathon.
100%, but it just shows as well like how much mindset can go into it, and that's such a big point of mental strength as well, that you got from that initial run where it did feel really daunting to a point where you felt like you were achieving something and really excited about it. And that's why I also think with movement it's just important for people just to try it. It's not going to be the be all and end all of a lot of people's mental health journey, but it can be a really amazing tool if you do find something that helps you or works for you.
Yeah, and especially like now that it's summer, I've been walking to work. I walked to work once last week, and it was
Still an achievement. You've got to celebrate that.
It was so good to get from A to B and not get on the bus. Like there was something about it where I felt like incredibly proud of myself just because I skipped that part of my day where I sit and scroll on my phone sometimes. So
yeah,
really positive.
I think also the big thing that I love about, for me, running, I guess that's like often my form of movement that I associate with helping my mental health. But it's just getting outside, and it's something that is so simple and so underrated. But I think just by getting out, and as you say, not by sitting and having being on your phone because you're aware of things that are going on around you, I think that can be really refreshing as to like what you're putting into your body.
Yeah, and I've had like a new thing, and I don't know if you find this, but with running without music, that's a separate challenge, and that's a challenge I try and sort of expose myself to a couple of times a week, because that headspace in the morning, like hearing what season it is, like hearing other people start their day, it's a very refreshing type of run, which is completely the opposite to me going out with music.
Yeah, no, I so agree. I actually couldn't find headphones the other day and went for a run without music, which is really unlike me. And initially I was so hyper aware of my breath, like my breathing, that I found it really strange. But then as I got into it, I was so much more aware of my surroundings, and it was actually quite nice. But I do think I'd stick to running with music where I can.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit easier.
Helps.
With your podcast, is there sort of, if you could say, okay, next year my dream guest would be this person, who would that be and why?
To be honest, I have a list, and it's so long, and I'm constantly adding to it. I think there's so many conversations I want to have and be able to almost provide a platform to share with other people as well. A few people who I've enjoyed recently and who I'd love to interview. One of them is Ovi Soka. If you remember him, he was on Love Island, and he wrote a book called You Are Dope. And it's almost like a workbook just to give yourself self-confidence and support your mental well-being. He's also an ex-professional basketball player, I think, so has that mental physical health overlap. But I would love to understand, like, he's just gone through a lot, I feel, with being in the public eye, professional sport, and to still be motivated to support other people. I think that would be a really interesting interview. And then I've got a list of a lot of people. I do a lot of work in psychedelics and on the research side. And there's a few professors over in the US who I'd love to understand, like, their research and where they think the mental health space is going.
So is that sort of work with psychedelics, is that through your uni course?
Yeah, exactly. I like specialized into it at the end, and I'm like the smallest cog in the wheel of a bigger project that's going on. But I went to a couple of talks about the research around psychedelics as a therapeutic use for mental health. And I really just wanted to form my own opinion on it. I think that there's a huge, almost a hype cycle at the moment around it. And I think that it's a topic area that needs to be treaded like very safely. And I think just while I was studying the field, like neuroscience anyway, I just wanted an opportunity to research it as well.
Yeah, it's so good to form your own opinion, like you said. It actually sort of leads on to my next question, because it can be a book, it can be a podcast, it can be sort of anything you've read or listened to recently which impacted you, which you would sort of want to recommend with anyone watching this interview.
I've just started, I'm like a few chapters in, Africa Brooks' book, The Third Perspective. Have you got it?
Yeah.
Have you got it there? Mine's literally.
Yeah, I'm like, anything in this world which comes out, I'm just.
Yeah, gotta read it, gotta do it.
The devil, but yeah, I'm a reader.
You're with that. So yeah, that's the book at the moment that I would definitely recommend. I haven't finished it, so I can't say everything that I've got out of it, but definitely from a relationship to others and myself, I think that book's going to be quite an important tool. I think it gives a really like unapologetically honest opinion on a lot of things. And otherwise, I think that would probably be my book at the moment. I keep going back to The Power of Now, to like dip in and out of as well, because it's not very long, but it's definitely a big one for that idea of being present. I find it like quite spiritual, which is not so much what I at the moment am resonating with so much, but I like the resource as a reminder to being present.
Yeah, it's also such a nice feeling when you realize you're being present. And for me, a lot of it is to do with switching off social media for a day. Like I delete the app because then I'm not sort of looking at it, and then apparently it takes 20 minutes to refocus after you're distracted. And because I'm such a distractible person, if I actually just delete the app, I really notice with my friends and things that I'm just so in it and responding so naturally and not overthinking things. And yeah, that book, I did read that one. It was really, really brilliant. But if you're sort of looking at trying to be present, I'd really recommend a book called Hooked by Talisha Fosh. And it's basically a book I just read about addiction. And I think so much of us have these addictive tendencies, maybe because it's not with alcohol, we don't register it as that something to be too worried about. But it really resonated with me, and that's helped me be so present, sort of recognizing those tendencies which are addictive, even if it's not a full-blown issue. So that'd be my one back. And
that's amazing. I'll let
you know
I'll read that one, and then after that we can debrief them.
Book club. Yeah. No, it's so nice to hear that. And also, yeah, it's amazing how these books can still be so powerful. And the fact that both of us are sort of in the same circles to want to read these books, it's quite nice. But moving into sort of like, obviously you've mentioned that you do running and you've spoken a lot about sort of following people in the fitness world. What 3 things would you say keep you feeling your best? And that doesn't just have to be exercise. It can be sort of any 3 things you swear by.
I think so. A big thing that I now almost scared that I'm going slightly on the preaching side, because I'm now saying everyone's got to do it, is journaling. And it's something that I know this is me flying my pen around, so I've got my journal here. It's something that I used to talk about but not practice, because you hear of people saying journaling's so good, and I kind of just jumped on that, write your 3 things that you're grateful for in the morning, or something that you've learned in the evening, or whatever prompts might be. And I started towards the end of last year, I think, as my master's was finishing and a few other things were going on in my personal life. I was slightly feeling like I was going back into a little bit of a pattern of self-destruction. And I recognized it, and I just started journaling just as a way of trying to recognize where that was coming from and why that was, what was influencing it, what was really at the forefront of my brain, and just a few other bits from a real spectrum of some stuff was really deep and some stuff really wasn't. But by writing it down, I would just had that almost third eye into what I was doing. And I now quite often will go to bed and write pages and pages. I don't even read it back, but I'm finding that a really useful tool. So I think for anyone that is feeling a bit stuck, even if it's like creatively, it doesn't have to be because you're struggling mentally at all. I think it's just a really good way of self-reflection and self-awareness.
I also find that I've journaled since I was 12 and I have all of them next door. And once a guy was here and he was like, "That's so intense." And I was like, to be honest, it is quite intense.
That is quite intense if you're not into it.
The day of anything and be able to look back and see what I was doing, what I was wearing. But for me, I find with things like, which other people find very helpful, like with therapy, I am such a people pleaser in that setting, and that I want the therapist to be okay. And I hate when people worry about me. That's like my biggest hatred. If someone says, "I'm worried about you," I just think, oh my God, please take me off your list of worries. Like that really sort of adds a weight to my shoulders I don't need. Whereas with a journal, you can be so honest with yourself and you can go over it and over it and over it. And for me, if something happens which upsets me, I need to talk about it for about 3 weeks. Like, one session is not enough. And I've always felt with therapy or something, if I'm coming back for like a 6th time and they're like, you still want to talk about this, I'll be like, yeah, I can't sleep unless I get it out.
Especially if you have like a brain that's unpicking like each tiny bit of it, which is similar to how everyone works, but it's like that thing of never really getting to the end of it until it's really unpacked, whereas you can get it out. And
I mean, this is just May. It's been a big one, but then I'll go through times where I don't really need to write, and it will just be sort of like bullet points of stuff I need to do at work.
Are you good at keeping it? Are you every day, did you say? Is that
at the moment?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's something that I was with a group like talking about it the other day, and I was saying, you know, I think one of the most important things with journaling as well is to make sure that if you do really want to get into the practice, to make sure that it's on your good days, your bad days, and your days where you're just so that when you feel stuck or you feel low, you have the practice in place to support yourself in a way, instead of just leaving it until you're suddenly like, oh, I should be writing things down, and doesn't necessarily like flow.
For me, I just keep it by my computer, so when I get home from work, before I like do anything, I write something, even if it's really short. I mean, the shorter ones tend to be so pointless, but like you said, it's just the practice of it.
And I mean, you never like most of the pages I've never even looked at again. They probably don't even make sense.
No, mine is so like dramatic as well.
Sorry, I went on such a tangent. So yeah, journaling definitely is my number one. Movement is definitely my number two, I think. But I would include just getting outside with that. I think especially days when I'm working from home or writing a research project, editing a podcast, like all these things that take a really long amount of time. When I sit for too long or get stagnant, I can definitely get in my own head. And that's where I think overthinking or slightly like negative like thought loops or other things can feed in. So making sure I'm getting out, moving my body really helps with that. And I think lastly, I think it is to the point that we were almost discussing earlier, making sure that I take time to detach from like those moments as well of being really busy and work, and making sure that there's downtime, like a cup of tea with a friend, just like some slow paced moments in a very like fast paced environment.
Yeah, I also find, I mean, you also live in London, and it's just sort of making sure that you have moments which are just so calm, and there's not like an end goal, but just to unwind and, like you said, see a friend, have a conversation. And like also for me, seeing friends is such a massive part of how I manage, because I don't want to be too in my world. And I think I have such a sort of active brain that whenever I see friends, it's also me trying to get into someone else's world and support someone else. And that helps me so much. But back to the London thing, we at Pruzan, we have done like a London guide I put together of things I do. And I think it's just always an interest of mine for people who are in the same city. You can have such different experiences, and you can have favorite spots to go to. You and your friends will like go back to one place all the time, and yet someone else will have never even heard of it. So if someone was in London for one day, where would you recommend they visit?
To kind of finish off most of the stuff I said, I love the parks. I think, this person can either go west and go to Holland Park and the Kyoto Garden there. I just think it's amazing.
I went there so much as a kid.
So, love it there. Or Hampstead Heath would have to be the other one. Jump in the ponds, go for a walk there. So nice. And actually the canals in Islington, any of those 3 walks I would definitely recommend, depending on location. And my new favorite place, I'm a big matcha girl, so kind of anywhere that someone's recommended a matcha. But there's a place called Tokonoko. I'm definitely saying that wrong, but can send it to you. And it's near Haggerston, and it just does really great cafe vibe that I really recommend to anyone.
Really? Oh, that's quite near me.
It's so nice, definitely.
It's just a matcha place.
I think it's like a Japanese cafe. I'm probably getting this wrong, but they've just got really nice like mugs. It's very homey, it's very chilled, like safe space vibes.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, thank you. That was sort of everything we wanted to cover. And yeah, it's also just been nice because you are naturally a runner and you turn to that. And obviously that's the brand's sort of core, like love and belief. But like you said, movement can be anything. And those like short walks or just doing a stretch on your floor, anything like that is just such a sort of key part to keeping well.